Hello and welcome back to Stu Structures. We're here to continue the build on the beanery with this video 19 in the series, so stay tuned. Like I said, welcome back. I'm Mark Stewart and we're going to continue this build we've been working on. This is video 19 and it looks like we're going to go into the 20s. If somebody would have told me we're going to have 20 videos on building this building to begin with, I would have thought they were nuts. It's just a huge structure with a lot of buildings that all interconnect. So it's taken a long time to build this building. I'm pleased with where it's going. In this segment we're going to continue on with putting downspouts on, building roofs, working on chimneys, windows and doors in the final hotel building back there. Maybe you've got to paint the brick first, working on staircases. There's just a lot of projects all going on at the same time. So we'll continue on with all that and see how far we get. Let's get started. First thing I want to do is kind of backtrack here. We got these roofs put together in the last session for the number 3 building back there, the twin roofs that make up that building. So I just want to come back here and mark the 2-foot on center for the standing seams. We need to get the standing seams added to this as far as these roofs go, and also the chimneys added to these roofs and painted and everything. So let's get these roofs finished. So first I come back and mark the 2-foot sections, and I want to measure both sides to from the same end, so that I know that the standing seams on both sides of the roofs are going to line up together. And then I come back with the square against the lower edge and make all those lines up through the building so I know where to glue the standing seams onto. And then when I get done, I have everything all laid out so that I can come back and put the ridge lines on and then the uprights on to do the standing seams. And these are just pictures of the finished lines in place. It's just graphite so it doesn't interfere with the glue. And then I come back and put the chimneys on because I want to run a couple of the seams right up to the chimneys on the upper and lower side. So I go ahead and glue the chimneys in place and get them where I need them, and then come back and add the ridge lines and then all the uprights that make up all the standing seams on these roofs. And once that's done, then we're ready to go ahead and add some paint to these roofs. So I come back and it takes 2 good coats. There's some areas I have to come back a third time and just touch up basic roofs, and like I said a couple times before, we may come back and add some weathering, but for right now that's as far as I'm going to go with them. And then in the last session we had added basic paints to all 4 of the walls for Hotel 2 back there. So we're coming through and adding all the mortar in all 4 walls and getting all the mortar nice and in. And it takes, a good 2 to 3 coats with this as well. And then I come back and do the dabbing effect for the brick on top. Now, I wanted to go just a little bit more into this than I have before. These makeup sponges are good. Make sure when you rip one out of the package that you have a good flat surface on that end to work with. If there are ridges and stuff in it, you're going to find that you're adding a little bit more in there than you need. And also, the longer that the paint sits there on your paper and the more tacky it gets, the better actually the results are going to be. And when you go back over some of those areas a second and third time and dab them, you actually get a little bit of texture to the brick, which makes a good surface on the brick. So then we just get all the remaining walls done, and then the brick is ready to rock and roll with all these walls. So then we come back and glue all 4 of those walls together, and we have the last building shell put together for this building. It's really a pleasure to get to this point. Another good-sized building. So then, like the other hotel and the other buildings, we're going to come back and start adding this cornice on. I had this pre-glued from when I did the last building, so I cut a 45 on the end of one end, then I put it up next to the building and mark the 45 on the other end before I cut it. And then I glue 2 sides on at one time, and this gives me good corners to work to when I cut the other pieces for the ends, so that I can get them to meet up nice and square, so that there's very little open gaps between the ends. And if there is, I can use that green stuff to come back and just do a little bit of fill, which I had to just a little bit on these, but basically the corners turned out really good. And then if you remember on the last shot, the little wood trim piece that goes underneath of that where the cornice meets the brick, I want to pre-paint these this time to make the painting process on this a little quicker. So I pre-cut these and I just glued them down to this and used a rattle can to paint them, and then came back and added those underneath the lattice. And I do this the same way. I do two opposite sides and then the other sides where they overlap on the ends. And that gives me a good edge to paint against to do the rest of the top of the cornice. So then we need to work on the roof and the top of the cornice. Well, you can see on this building has a flat roof where all the others had raised roofs on them. So this cornice we're going to have to do just a little bit differently. Now the first layer is the same as the other, and I do two ends, and there's a little bit of gap between that and the brick back there, but I glue on the two ends and then do the two sides to meet those, and that brings me up level with the brick walls on the inside. And then the next piece is a cap piece, so I have to come through and measure because I want to make sure that I step out on the outside edge of the cornice just a little bit, and then on the inside I want to come in past the brick just a little bit, and I want to glue to the top of the brick edge as well as the outer piece that we just added onto the cornice on the outside, and then the roof will actually sit down inside this. So I come back once I've got a good measurement and cut my strips to work with on this, and then I come back and just start cutting them to lengths. I do this the same as I did the others. I do two opposite sides, and then here you see the two ends glued in between those, so that's all four pieces to the top of the cornice glued on, and it gives me a nice edge to come back later and glue the roof down inside of. And just go ahead and put basic layer of paint on this. I'm sure I'll have to come back and touch it up later. Basically the inside brick walls will have to be black once I get the roof set down in there just a little ways, and some things added to this, but basically that's the gutter. And then we come back and we glue in all the windows and doors. I had shorted myself a few windows, so I had to come back and reprocess 4 more windows to get everything glued into this building. But then I just came back and glued them all in. There's a couple of them that are a little tight, but when I do these I make sure the windows are as tight to the top as I can possibly get them, because if there's any errors, remember I've got to add the window sills to the bottom of these, and that'll cover any discrepancies at the bottom. So then I'm going back to the other hotel and going ahead and adding the windowsills to that building. And I'm just using this styrene strip this time instead of cutting my own strips. There's just, there's 70 some of them to do between these two buildings. So I just decided to mass produce these. So I broke out the chopper and I just taken that strip, I set it up for the right length, and I'm just coming through and chopping all those. It just saves so much time in producing large things in numbers. If you don't have one of these, it's a good tool. They're a little different. This is an older one, but they basically still do the same thing, so they're just a good tool to have. And then to save more time as well on this structure, these two structures, I decided to go ahead and just pre-paint everything. So I just added tape to this board and put all the pieces on the tape and use this rattle can. When I say rattle can, this is what I use. It's just a $2.45 cheap paint that has a ball bearing in it. It rattles when you shake it up. That's why I call them rattle cans. But I just take it outside so I don't asphyxiate myself, and just 2 light coats on this, and it gets a really good coating on it. And I just hit it from 2 angles, opposite corners when I paint them, and it's all good. And here's a shot with the windowsills mounted in the windows, and also have some of the glass mounted behind them, the clear styrene. So just a couple more steps out of the way, and it's nice to use these seals at the bottom. Now, one of the other tools that I use a lot and I've never brought up before are, there are lots of different types of normally closed forceps, these tweezers, various things like that, but they're nice as third hands for holding things when you work on them. And one of the things I used them for are these gutters. I showed the heating gun and how I go ahead and I went ahead and did all the tops for a whole bunch of these so I could get them done and out of the way, so they've all been bent. And then the next process is painting, which I've showed some of that before.
But basically I use these tweezers, and I put them all in these tweezers and hold them in place while I paint them, so I don't have to hold them with my hands. And the first step is just put this bronze paint on them like I showed them before, because these gutters would have been copper. And once I put that undercoat on, and come back with this black coat on top of that, and just a little bit of that copper shows through here and there, and it kind of looks like a nice weathered downspout. So these are just the 3 phases of going through and doing these. The other thing is working on these Tichy lights that I had talked about and showed previously. But basically I use them just in this clamp that I put on the edge of my desk that I spoke of before. And I use this, it's kind of just a round ball type of router bit in my Dremel. And I come through and I do put some cloth on the edge of that, because there's nothing in this vice grip that keeps it from slipping out. So if I put just a little bit of cloth on the edges, it keeps it from moving around. I clamp it down real tight. I cut off the little light bulb that's molded on. Then I use this router bit just to cup out the dish of the lamp shade so that it's, you know, concave the way normal lamps would be. And this just goes through and gets all that done, and the clamp holds it in place, and it's sprue before I ever take them out of the sprue, and just makes it easier to work with than trying to take them out and doing the tiny parts individually once they're out of the sprue. So it just saves a little bit of effort doing it this way. Then I use this little hand drill, and I turn the thing upside down in the sprue, and I just come back through with a small drill bit that's just big enough for the 2 wires on the LEDs that I'm using to squeeze together and slip up through. And then I come next to where the little holder is for the top of the lamp, and I just drill down at an angle so that it comes out in the convex area underneath, right in the center of the light, and there's a hole that comes up through. And I do that to all the lights. And then that way, when I mount the holder that glues to the building onto it, that hole will be right underneath of it, so it's not that visible to run the wires up through and do that. And then I paint all the bottoms of those silver underneath as a reflective type shade. And I come back with some clear Gorilla Glue and then mount all the tiny LEDs inside these, so it just looks like a little bulb down inside the fixture. And then I just hold those in a type of little vise and paint all the fixtures and everything black except for the back part that glues up against the building. And just do a whole bunch of these. I'm going to need, I think it was 8 of these to go on this building above the doors.
Okay, so that's where we're going to leave off on video 9 of building the beanery. Like I said in the last few videos, it's starting to come together quick. We've still got a good ways to go. There's a lot of little stuff that goes on to all this. And those 2 big roofs on both those hotels we haven't even started yet. There's still some more little detail stuff to even start that we haven't worked on. And some of the stuff we have done, we need to start looking at that overhead bridge too. It has supports that stand out from either side of the building, and the ironwork that goes in between those 2 buildings we need to get in place before we put all this structure together. And then we have the roof for that 1-story building in between the 2 hotel buildings as well. So there's still plenty to do on this building. The staircase on the back with the wooden enclosure, and then the stairs coming off that overhead bridge down alongside that wall. You kind of saw we got a start on that one. But anyway, there's still a good bit to do on this building. So next week we'll come back with another show and continue on with all this. I want to thank you for coming back and sharing these videos and this time with me. I hope you're jumping out there and scratch building some buildings of your own, at least playing with some small stuff and learning. I mean, that's the only way to get into it, is just to do it. You can learn by watching other people like me do these shows and get ideas on how to do some things. But when it comes down to it, it's really all about just jumping in there with your hands and doing it for yourself and see what works for you. Some of the things that I do, they work good for me, but there's other people that say, well, you ought to do this way or that way. And you know, I have good results with what I do. So it's all about what works for you. Anyway, like and share these videos. There's a bunch of people out there that like to have some of this information. Make them aware that this channel is out there so they can learn how to build these buildings. And down below this video is a subscribe, little red subscribe button. Go ahead and push that button. It's a free service, and right next to it is a bell. If you push on that bell as well, then you'll be notified every time a new video comes out in this series. And like I've said before, I do have a couple other things coming out before too long. Sometimes I just throw little extras, get you in there between my videos once in a while. So if you hit the bell, you'll be notified when those come out as well. It's really cold here. We're in single digits and below zero with wind chill, and at nights it's right at zero without the wind chill. So I'm staying indoors and playing with trains, building buildings. You know, all this stuff I need eventually during the summer when I get into my work season. It's really hectic and it's hard to get a lot of this done, so I'm really enjoying this time of the year, and I hope you do too, and you get some of your stuff out and work on it and play with it, whether it's trains, track, cars, scenery, buildings like this, or whatever you really want to spend your time doing. Get out there and do it and learn. Thank you again for coming back and sharing my videos, and I look forward to showing you the next one next week. And happy model railroading.